So, John, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming with your brother. You guys are very interesting guys because you are twins. I don't have capabilities to interview both of you at the same time, so we are gonna split this interview in two parts. Your twin brother is gonna come later on, but thank you very much for doing that because I wanna discuss with you something that is on my mind for quite a bit, and I was looking for the right person to explain this topic so the result of this conversation wouldn't be downgrading of the
hmm
topic. We're gonna talk about the wheat, the history of wheat, the business. You guys were doing this business in California. Now you are in Florida. I was in California. Now I'm in Florida. So we have a lot of in common.
Yeah,
Also, I stopped drinking, let's say, almost 2 years ago completely,
I didn't know that.
and I start smoking weed when I'm reflecting, let's say, last 2 years. Well, I have to say it was very good decision
hmm
because it really like show me a lot of different things and a lot of different ideas and so on.
hmm
Speaking of the way how you started smoking weed, or how did you get into this business? Where are you from and so on? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Being a musician, I think the drug culture is pretty prevalent, and it's an unfortunate thing because musicians tend to be creative, and this creativity is often stifled by the drug culture. So growing up, we played guitars. We played in a metal band. It was like very, very prevalent everywhere you'd go. People were either drinking or smoking pot, but it was very misguided.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why I say pot or cannabis sativa. You say pot has so many names, right?
Mm-hmm.
And many of the names are sort of they're disrespectful to what it is because those names come from the drug culture. It comes from the pot culture. It comes from the stoner culture.
Mm-hmm.
So cannabis sativa is definitely a more, when you say it that way, I think it gives more respect to what it actually is, the medicinal side. But I started smoking young. The first time I had an experience with it, we were on a farm. One of our farm buddies, older sisters, she had a big bag of weed and she rolled us some and we went out into the farmhouse. We didn't know what we were doing. We just lit this stuff up and we stayed in the farmhouse for like 6 hours just playing with the horses and being kids with the animals. And it was kind of fun. It was great. We didn't smoke for a long time after that until we started playing music and enjoying what we thought rock stars should do. So we would smoke before we played, we'd smoke during we played, we'd smoke after we played. Smoking was always there, and the drinking too is kind of like what you'd experience. But the alcohol was definitely something that I would say is a different, completely different thing. You know, it pulls you away, it stifles your feelings. It has a very different thing that cannabis did. Cannabis, what I realized early on was it'd make you insightful, introspective, it'd make you more quiet. Since you're young, you're going through a lot of stuff. So you'd smoke and you'd think about school. What am I going to do with my life in 5 years? Everybody's asking me what am my career, all these things. So it'd give you this time to kind of think. And my parents were Christians at the time, so it was a hidden thing. We were in Florida, so it was a conservative state, so it was very illegal. It was very much a taboo. People would look at smoking weed as something that was very bad and not something that you would do to. There was no medicinal side. I was never explained the medicinal side of cannabis. I was enjoying some of the medicinal sides unbeknownst to me, but it was not explained. It was not something that people. I felt bad while I was doing it all the time. You know, like I was being the bad kid.
You were feeling guilty.
Yes, and that was part of the rock and roll culture too. So that was my introduction to cannabis. That's how it began. It was sort of a way to be creative with the music
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and try and hang out with your friends.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think our experience is very similar because I started smoking when I was just hanging out with my friends, but we were really just hanging out. We were talking, but we were not spending the time in a dumb way, I
Mm,
have to say. We were really like chatting, and a lot of like really creative ideas came out of that, including this podcast.
wow.
That's one of those things that really like first we were talking about it, we were like actually like like thinking loud, like how many cool people we actually met through our life, and the fact that if we would stay back home in Czech Republic, we would never probably seen such a people. We would probably find some other people, but we were really enjoying what we found here in the States and in
Mhm.
LA
Mhm.
and and so on. So
That's a really good point.
so it's actually like a really creative way how you can spend a time with your friends,
Mhm.
and all of us quit drinking because of that. Because
Wow.
the drinking part is really bad. To me, drinking doesn't have any purpose. I mean, yeah, I would have one beer for a taste or something, but now for almost 2 years, I don't even do that because I don't really see any need.
I
And
agree.
cannabis is really like demonized mostly by people who have no problem to go to the store, buy a beer or bottle of vodka, and you can literally kill yourself with that. If you will drink a full bottle
Mhm.
of some hard liquor, yeah, say goodbye to your health and that's it,
That's right.
But the same people are gonna be telling you that you are some type of junkie if you are smoking a joint at
Mhm.
home, meanwhile you are reading a book.
Yes. You know, and that's such a good point because like when we were playing, these were hardworking kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we got in our band, we were playing 8 hours a day. We were writing music. We were doing our best to put our band on the map.
Mm-hmm.
So when we would smoke, we would work, we would talk, we would have these moments where we were trying to discuss music in a very abstract way.
Mm-hmm.
These weren't kids just watching videos, and just zonking out watching cartoons, We were being very industrious, and that's a really good point that it reminds me of.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had dreams, we had aspirations, we wanted to tell the world something with music. We didn't know what it was, but the cannabis allowed us to be creative and to, like you said, kind of peel back the layers of the subconscious. We were explorative and we weren't afraid. I think a lot of the times when you have somebody who's saying alcoholic, we talked about earlier, kind of like with our warm-up talk conversation, they're afraid of the background, of their life. And when that comes into focus, and cannabis can do that, cannabis will bring a lot of that background stuff, the baggage, the stuff you're sweeping under the rug, it'll bring it into focus. And it gets a bad name for that, but that's why it's an honest drug. That's why we value our best friends, right? Our best friends, the people who care about us most, they'll be the ones who step in and say, hey, man, you're not doing this right, or you should be stopping this because they love us.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to hear it at first. We're like, you know what? You're attacking me. You might be a little defensive, right? But in a few 3 days, 4 days, you're like, you know what? He's right, or she's right. He's telling me the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to hear that. It was uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And cannabis can do that for you when used appropriately and well. It can tell you the truth about your background. So, like, if you have a serious drinking problem, we all know, because I had one too, man. That's what eventually overrode the cannabis, was the drinking in the metal culture. Because you're always taking, shots of bourbon, dude, straight bourbon. You're drinking that stuff. Like, I know from your guys' culture, it's vodka, right? But
It's more beer.
Is it beer?
It's beer. It's
okay.
Beer. Beer.
We would do the beer with the bourbon, but the bourbon was the one that you get 3 of these, you're good. And it became such a big problem because I noticed I was insulating myself from the truth with the alcohol, and the alcohol was becoming, it was a demon in my life. It was a monkey on my back. All of a sudden I couldn't have conversations or go into a gig without being desperate to have that alcohol fix in order to play. Weed never was like that. I could go days without it. If I didn't have it before a gig, I was fine. My body wasn't having this biochemical response that's addictive. That's what an addictive quality substance is, like heroin, nicotine, caffeine even. All those things have a biological connection to you that cause your body to want it. Cannabis doesn't do that. You can have like sort of a mental attachment to cannabis the same way somebody has it for cucumber juice.
Yeah.
But it's not the same thing as having like an addiction. And so I got addicted to alcohol, and I had to step away from it when I was 26, and I quit for like 6 years.
Nice.
And it was really good. Now I only drink like for, my buddy's having a wedding.
Yeah,
with my
occasional.
wife. Yeah,
I have
occasional.
nothing against that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fulfill any purpose in my life, so I don't do it at all. I don't care,
I've seen too many people hurt
Yeah.
by it,
Yeah.
And like if
Why?
I know somebody who has a problem with it, I won't drink with them, like
Yeah.
I try to stay away from it too.
So now we maybe could go into what the cannabis actually is, because most people have some resistant opinion on that thing, but they never even seen the actual plant. They've been told that cannabis is the first step into heroin, which is complete nonsense. I still remember some of my teachers telling us that at school. It's crazy, man. Like the level of propaganda behind this is crazy, because on the same level, those people have nothing against pills, against an anxiety, against depression and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that are harming you in a crazy way.
I couldn't agree more.
But
Yeah.
they are telling you that if you roll one joint, the next day you are gonna be shooting needle to your hand,
Right.
to your arm, you know. So tell me more about that.
Okay. That's an excellent thing. And I think that's the medicinal quality of cannabis and how that has unfortunately been held under the water. They've been drowning that out for a long time. Cannabis is a medicine. It is meant to be used as such. It comes out of the ground as a plant. People have been using this stuff for thousands of years that way. And it's incredibly useful, and it's not going to hurt your body. I'll give you a couple examples right off the bat. So just to kind of tie into like your teachers, right? So I grew up in a conservative Christian household. My mom was Colombian. So she grew up in Colombia. She's first generation. She spoke Spanish, all this. Cannabis was everywhere, but even still, she thought that cannabis would, this gateway drug.
Oh, really?
Even still, she grew up in a house where they had the leaves, they put oil on it, and they'd use it sort of a topical thing. But the smoking and that whole thing, she never touched it her whole life. And so when we were in our business, she was like, I respect it and all this and that, but, I would never do it myself, right? She started having trouble sleeping after she had our sister. She had late, so she's 42 years old. She had our sister, and she increasingly had difficulty getting sleep. And one day I was like, Mom, and this began for about a 2-year process. It's like, Mom, I want you to try this. It's going to help you get some sleep. No, John. I have this stuff from the doctor. It is going to help me. I was like, okay, Mom. She tried that. It created dependency. She got sleep for maybe a month or 2, 3 months. The sleep started getting worse again, so she had to come off of it. So she went through this process of trying what the doctors offered her, and it just never was something that she could use consistently. It always had a negative feedback loop. I mean, these are drugs that are made by factories.
Yeah,
These are
yeah.
scientists.
Yeah.
They're never really addressing the problem.
Mhm.
Okay? So finally she acquiesced, and she's like, you know what? I'm going to try this I'm going to try it. So she tried it, and now she loves it.
Mhm.
And she takes 16 milligrams of the THC with a full spectrum oil with CBD in it as well. And the amount of change in her sleep habits and her life, the way it's gotten so much better for her, she tells all of her friends at church the same story, man, because she wants them all to understand how different it is.
Mhm.
But it's, again, encountering the stoner culture, the way that it's used. People think of Cheech and Chong. They think of their teacher in high school, like you're sticking a needle in your arm the minute after you smoke it. My mom's not smoking it. She's eating it. She takes a little pill at the end of the night, and that's it. And she gets good sleep. So people need to understand that it's a medicine. And as true with all medicines, dose is extremely important. So if you're being introduced, if your doctor says, I'm going to prescribe you Vicodin or something like that, or Valium, you went through a really intense car accident, you have PTSD, something like that. He's not going to give you the bottle and just say, hey, take as much of this as you want. He's going to say you take 1 to 2 a day, and that's it, and that's going to go for such and such amount of time. There's a specific way you're supposed to use the drug so that you can actually get benefits from it. Because if you take 5 Vicodin, you're just going to drool all over yourself and have a horrible experience. So you need to use this appropriately. And that's what people aren't being taught in the cannabis culture. So cannabis ends up being hurt by the lack of education involved with it because it needs to be treated as medicine. So when my mom was able to get the proper dose to be able to sleep, she now had respect for it, right? But only too often some friend will be like, hey, here's a cookie. And the guy's like, oh, is it going to help me sleep? Yeah, it'll help you sleep. It's a 25 milligram cookie. They eat the whole cookie. Then they're on the moon for a day, and they're like, never again, never trying that again, when they should have just had a little piece of the cookie. So I think the big issue is education, being able to dose it appropriately for the person so that they get the desired effect, and so they understand that they can control this and use this. If I get into a really fast car and no one teaches me how to drive it, I'm going to wreck that thing. So it's the same kind of story. It's the same thing. And that's why the government can control it, because they'll take those stories of people who've had horrible experiences and they'll put that in, like you said, propaganda, right? And that's what everybody begins to believe. And they're not hearing the good stories, like my mom in church saying, I've been having trouble sleeping for 20 years, right?
I have the same family story. Recently, my grandma had a problem with her knee. It kind of hurt. And she was using different oils and stuff. I contact my buddy. He drove to my city and he gave her a THC cream. She said her the pain went out at night. She could sleep and she got a taste to eat. So once you eat, your body has a nutrition to guess what? To recover, right?
That's right.
So when you feel like crap, everything hurts, and you don't have any sense of taste, you don't eat, which make things way worse because when you don't eat, your body cannot repair anything.
That's right.
So instantly it works, and I had to like present it to her like, hey, it's completely a natural thing. Try it. And she was so desperate because of the pain, she did that, and she clearly told me after a couple of days that there's a big difference.
It's awesome.
You know, and
Yeah.
it's someone who is like over 70, and they have this whole life understanding of weed, that's the drug, but having a 20 shots on a wedding is completely okay.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to change it, but because the pain in this case was my ally,
It is.
I was able to do it
Mhm.
because I was able to tell her, and at the same time I was telling her like, it's not for everyone. If you are some person who just should be working whatever and has a bunch of responsibilities, you shouldn't be sitting on couch and be smoking one joint after another.
Mhm.
And that goes to the dosing. That's exactly what you just said.
Mhm.
Because if you have the right dosage for the right moment, like everything, it can be miracle.
Mhm.
But if you have the wrong dosage for the wrong moment, well, say goodbye to your life because
you
you're
go.
gonna mess up big time.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about the California weed culture?
Mhm.
Because I grew up there for my adult life. I seen it. I got into it on the end of my stay in California, but I know everybody who grows. I saw the little plants growing with the water running through them. I seen
Mhm.
big plants. I seen my friend telling me crazy story that because he has a bunch of flowers on his garden and he has one chicken only and a dog, and the chicken eats the leaves or something from it and then is thinking that it's a dog. The chicken think it's dog and is trying to play with the dog all the time. So there is a lot of things I have
Hilarious.
experienced, but can you tell me more about the
Sure.
culture?
Before I hit on that, I want to
Okay.
say one more thing about, and this is to help people understand how their biochemical, the way God made us as far as creatures, it works with cannabis. How do our bodies work with cannabis? So inside of our bodies, we have something called an endocannabinoid system. And just as the name suggests, we make our own cannabinoids. So smoking pot, eating pot, vaping pot, cannabis, however you're ingesting it, it's important for people to know that your body's already making this stuff. The only reason why it's reacting with your body is because your body is used to making it and then the receptors using it. So like when you take heroin or cocaine or any of these other drugs that cause your glands to release your serotonin, then they bind, right? Many times it's creating a disparaging, you're getting an imbalance, right? With cannabis, it's not like that. It's very different. And this is why it works so well with your nerves. Because many people, like you said, pain was their ally. It helped you. Same thing with my mom. She had severe neck pain, and that's why she couldn't sleep. It was because the pain would keep her awake, or she'd go to sleep and then her neck would start aching and she'd wake up. So what cannabis does for anybody who's in a lot of pain is it takes the reaction of your nerves. It's telling your brain, I'm in pain. You're getting that pain signal. And what it does is it disassociates your brain from that pain. And it'll actually cause de-inflammation in that area. Because inflammation is the body saying, I have a problem. So your body is causing that inflammation. Because when you get like a torn rotator cuff, the day that it gets torn, the body's not going to inflame. It's usually 4 or 5 days later it causes it to inflame. So we'll have chronic inflammation in our bodies. So when the cannabis is able to disassociate yourself by giving the therapy to the nerve, that inflammation will then come down, allowing the body to finally heal. So my mother was able, and that's completely the opposite of what like painkillers do. Painkillers dull the pain.
Just numb it.
So then when the pain comes back, the brain's like, oh, we're in pain again, and then it
Another
sends
one.
more, and then it sends more inflammation. So it's a compounding effect. It never really gets better. Same thing with ibuprofen, same thing with Tylenol, same thing with any of the really over the like serious things like Roxy's, any of the other like opium style stuff. it will cause that pain signal to just dull. And then when it comes back, it's even worse and the inflammation gets worse. So this is something I like to tell people because it's causing your body to react with pain in a healthy way. It's giving therapy to the nerves and it's reacting with an endocannabinoid system, something you already have. You know, so I like to educate people on that front so they know. But to answer your point or your question about California cannabis culture, I think it's really different from SoCal, kind of like where you're at in LA, up to like, I'd say the mid-state, which is where we were at, kind of like Santa Cruz, right there in San Jose, you know, up.
It's the Bay Area.
Yeah, the Bay Area.
Okay.
That kind of like is like the in-between. It's like the bridge, and then you're into NorCal.
Humboldt County. And
yeah, or Sonoma County, where it really begins, like wine country and all this agriculture and stuff. And to be honest with you, I'm not like, I love California, but I definitely connect with the NorCal. I love those guys, dude. Those guys are my brothers. Yeah. They will have like some of the worst stuff happen to them, and they have just the best attitude all the time. I'll be like, yo, dude, Jeremy, what's going on? You know, he's like, oh, my kid's sick. You know, my garden, it's like he's having issues on every front. But he's like, but it's cool, man. You know, I got a chance to see the sunrise today and everything is good, bro. Like, you know, you want some breakfast? I'll make you some food. Like the sweetest culture ever. They have such a good attitude. And that's where weed was born, or cannabis was really taken seriously, was in the NorCal, Humboldt area.
That's when I actually open on the map, because people don't even know how actually the huge area California is. So the Southern California is pretty much just this part, the San Diego, Los Angeles, up to like Bakersfield, I would say, which is like somewhere right here. There's no, Fresno is too high, but somewhere right here is Bakersfield. And then you're talking about this area. This is a Bay Area, like San Jose, San Francisco, and so on. And then even more up, this is like the Humboldt County area is like, I don't even know where exactly it is. My service sucks.
It's kind of like, you're right there. It's like more near
those are like three different like fragments of California.
Totally.
And each one is completely different.
It's a crazy subcultures in each one. Yeah.
And people don't usually even understand like how big difference it is. Okay, so just go on.
Yeah, it's crazy how big the difference. I didn't know what it was. I remember the first time driving there, I was just seeing desert, and then I saw redwoods, and then I was like, now we're all of a sudden in a rainforest. I was like, this place is crazy. But I'd say that the NorCal is where it really began. I mean, because like cannabis, if you take it back to its roots in the United States, it was, I believe, made popular by the musicians. Entertainment, you look at all these stories, I mean, people were on everything back in the 1920s.
Yeah, they were really trying to do whatever, right?
Yeah, it was crazy. People were just on everything. But the musicians and the sort of the SoCal nucleus of like LA and music and entertainment and that whole thing sort of fed into this desire to grow and cultivate it, and it was still illegal. So the people obviously were trying to find places where they could do it without having people look at them, right? And so they started to migrate up north in the state, and they found more room to do that. Obviously it was better to grow anyway. So if you have the mind for agriculture, it's a better place to grow. And so they'd go up north, and that's where it began. And many of these people, like we were talking about earlier, they were very much in love with the cannabis. They were the first people to fight for it, to show that it wasn't just stoner culture, to show that they had a lot of medicinal benefits. And so they started little farms up there. They got shut down. They got destroyed by the feds came in many times in the 80s, the 70s, all the way up to it, and they got just burned down to the ground several times. And they persisted and persisted and persisted. And finally they got the ear of Sacramento. And over time, it became legal for medicinal value. And then in 2017, it finally became recreationally legal. And I think Oregon and Washington actually did it before California, interestingly enough. But that's
Colorado
kind of the way.
Was the first one, right? I think.
It may have been.
I think it was Colorado, because I remember around the time that you just mentioned, everybody in LA was talking about the Colorado thing, and I remember they said if Colorado is gonna have a success with that, meaning there's gonna be not increase of crime or anything like that, they are gonna legalize it in LA. And it was like everyone's eyes in LA area were heading towards Colorado.
You're right. I do remember that. And then they saw the money that they were making. They're
Yes,
like,
the
oh,
taxes
yeah, we
and stuff.
definitely want this.
Yeah, taxes and stuff.
Yeah, it was interesting because they were all scared, weren't they? Like, what's
Yes,
going to happen?
yes, what's gonna happen? But they
Yeah.
were like expecting it, like that it should be good, right? Because they know what the weed is all about. But also at the same way, they're like, maybe if there's gonna be some problems, they
Right.
will never legalize it here,
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so some people had like problems with that.
They had a lot. And I remember the fringe culture, the people who were like too afraid to try it. And there were a lot more than I thought there were. Like people who lived in California they just didn't smoke because it wasn't recreational. Their friends would have it and everything. They're just like, I'm not going to do it until. There's a lot of those people. And it's like, well, what are they going to do when they have their first puff of a joint or, their first whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up going over great.
Mm-hmm.
The people who
Yeah.
liked it. The people who didn't. I think the biggest problem was between the issue of big corporations coming in, and taking away this business that was largely run by passionate individuals who weren't in it for the money, who really loved cannabis, and that big corporation kind of stealing their meal ticket, and that sucked.
Mm-hmm.
Because we saw a lot of our brothers and sisters out there who were in it because they loved it, and they eventually got pushed out just because when you have a big corporation, obviously you can do things cheaper and better. That's what happens when you scale up. So that did suck. But I'd say like that would be the difference. And I really narrowed it down. So like it started in Humboldt, but it's everywhere in California now. I mean, like a lot of the SoCal guys, they
Palm
do a lot
Springs,
of
area.
it's everywhere. They do a lot of distillates down south. There's ton of industry everywhere in California now. I mean, Humboldt still does hold, sort of the gold standard of what it is to be the best farms, and it's just because of the climate and the place. They have more water there too. They don't have any water now, but water's always a situation there, man. Let me tell you what, people kill each other over that stuff all the time, and that's no joke. But that's the way I saw cannabis in itself grow, as if like a really brief way that the culture grew, and a lot of people fought for it. Yeah.
Speaking of cannabis, can you tell me also if you know other uses of the cannabis than for a purpose of extracting the THC from it?
Yes.
Because I think like the plant is actually really helpful in so many different ways. Anyone who ever saw the plant itself and tried to destroy it by, let's say, ripping it apart, tilling it apart, like pretty much had to at some point realize like it's not gonna happen because the plant is very, very strong in many levels. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a robust plant. They call it weed for no reason. That stuff will grow. They used it for a long time. Matter of fact, the beginning of the nation, I believe it was one of our founding fathers. I want to say was George Washington, but I might be wrong about that. They put it into legislation that mandatory for the farmers to grow. I think it was like 5 to 10 acres of. At that point, it wasn't cannabis, but it was hemp, because they'd been using hemp for all of the sails, the rope.
Yes.
It was a very useful, quick-growing agriculture product that they could use to make, and it was the best. I mean, it wasn't just because it was quick-growing. It made the best rope. It made the best canvas. It made it was just the best that you could use. So I'm seeing this in recent, probably like the last 7 years. Hemp has made an extraordinary comeback. And that's because of the fractionalization of the cannabis plant. So what they did was they found out there are these cannabinoids. So THC gets the biggest, everybody knows THC, right? Now everybody knows about CBD, but that only began because as they took this plant down and they started to distill it and take it apart, remove it from the biomass, right? And they're looking for the exact chemicals that are producing these exact effects, like we talked about the nerves, right? CBD was fractionalized. Fractionalized means like it was taken out and separated, right? And they found out like this CBD was really useful for seizures. With the culture in California, many of these parents, they were introduced to cannabis. It started off as just cannabis. So they didn't know exactly what was in it that was helping the kids. And then finally they found out, okay, it's CBD. So they started taking the CBD out and using that. And then that started a fractionalization process. We're like, well, what other stuff inside of this beautiful plant can we use that's going to have very identifiable, specific outcome when we take it? So CBN was taken out, CBG was taken out, CBD, and these acronyms all represent a larger scientific name.
Got it.
You can look it up.
Yeah.
But that's what began it, and it's obviously like CBD is one of the more useful, highly, it's been tested the most. But it's only just now being broken open. Like CBN is big for sleep. It's very, very useful. And these CBN and CBD, for those who don't know, it's non-cerebral. So THC, the Delta 8, Delta 10, Delta 9, these are all derivatives of THC. Those are psychoactive. So they're going to have those impacts, right? But these other, they're finding more, but I believe there's 136 to almost 200 now that they're finding cannabinoids, specific cannabinoids inside of the plant that can be used. So, and it takes time to test them. And then of course you have the double-blind placebo test. Like there's a very long process to finding the clinical studies to prove what these things can do. And unfortunately in cannabis, the funding has been an issue due to legislation, all these things. And so CBD has been probably the most popular. It is the most popular. And so I'd say those are the biggest ways that I've been seeing it change as far as just a consumable, like smokable product where you're getting the entire dossier of cannabinoids by virtue of an oil or whatever, is getting it taken apart and just using those specific little things and seeing what they can do for people.
It's crazy that the plant actually has a purpose in a piece as a whole, you know, like as a plant, but also as a something that you can actually like smoke, or even like even take on little smaller pieces for very individual and specific reasons. Because let's say that this ingredient does this one, but because the THC is the majority in that plant, if you smoke that, you will never actually get the full potential of those benefits because you're just gonna be high as fuck.
And that's the truth, man, because like CBD was in such low levels for a long time. So it was a very trace amount. So they would find genetics where it was maybe like 0.5, you know. Now they have versions and genetics of hemp where it's up to like, I think 3 or even 6.
Wow.
And so they've specifically started honing the genetics to make CBD, to make the CBD in the plants the most. But you're right, because most of the time THC is definitely we've been breeding cannabis sativa for high THC for decades.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the original plant pretty much can be kind of gone, right? Because it's already like so modified from the original plant that people only thing they wanted was the THC percentage to be as high as they probably can, which I don't really like that.
Me neither, I agree.
Because when I have something that is like 46% or 47, like you can buy on one of those shops that I just opened here for illustrations, it's crazy. But sometimes I have way better experience with something what is like 16, 17%, you know? So can you tell me more about what you guys did, how you got into this business?
Yeah. Oh man.
The story.
Yeah, geez, that was a rock and roll story right there.
Let's go.
Rock and roll story.
Let's go.
Okay. So we played in a metal band. We wanted to be metal musicians. I still love music. We got a project going right now. It'll never die. You know, like when you get that, you just keep doing it the rest of your life. But we were in Florida, and Florida was a conservative state, so there's not a lot of metal concerts. We did our best here in this tiny little ethos and pond of whatever this place is. And then we decided, everyone's like, you got to go to the West Coast. If you guys want to make it big and do your best, you got to go over there. So we did. And we started playing gigs. We started getting in with the culture, and it was everywhere. Like we were in Santa Cruz, so it was a surfing culture, a very wonderful, small little town. And everybody's full of love. Like I said, it was like a brand new culture. I met the best of what and I can say this without batting an eyelash. Santa Cruz, that place is probably the best balance of what California can offer. You have some of the NorCal, some of the SoCal, but everybody there is extremely kind, friendly. They're hardworking too. There's some hippie culture, but it doesn't get too crazy. It was wonderful. So it taught me a lot. And of course, we're trying to make money because it's really expensive to live out there. And so we're playing gigs, and some guys would come in, and they'd have all this pot, and I'm growing it, and and we started to get an idea of what was going on. One of our friends was a broker out there, and he's like, I sell on behalf of the farmers to either other farmers who need it, who have run out, who need to sell to what we called dispensaries or clubs back in the day. There were the medicinal, and the way it worked was, you get a card, right? So you go to a doctor, you say, hey, look, I have this issue. The doctor would look you over, and he'd say, okay, I'm going to give you a card. You have a card for 10 pounds. And that means you can either grow your 10 pounds at your own house by yourself. You can take care of cultivating your own pot, your own cannabis for your medical issue, or you can take your card and put it in a collective. And if you put it in a collective, somebody will go and grow that for you on behalf of you, maybe take some of your product, take care of the growing process for you, give you a piece of your product, of whatever your card was worth, and then they'll take that and sell it to other dispensaries, so it makes sense for them to cultivate it. So it was a very good program, and it helped people grow that wanted to grow, and it helped people enjoy the benefits of cannabis without having to grow at the same time. But this left room for brokers to start working. So the broker would go to a collective. He would represent the collective. This is what we started to do. And they would get the collective, the grow op, the garden would take and say, I have 100 extra pounds I need to get rid of, right? So you go and you go sell that to different dispensaries, find out what they wanted, because many times a collective would have one genetic or two genetics. So they'd have like Blue Dream and, maybe some diesel or something like that. Usually it was one or the other. And we call them sours, or, there's a lot of different ways you can break up genres. Okay. And anybody who knows cannabis will tell you it's an endless, there's always something new, but mainly it's like fuels, sativa, and indica, right? So, and anyway, you find out what the club wanted. If they wanted, they had no sours, you go find some good sours, you go bring it to them, right? And so you get a price from the grow op, the collective. He'd say, I want $1,100 for my, it was never $1,100. I want $2,600 for this pound. And so you say, okay, take this. And we had cards. So we go to the doctor. We have I have a license where I can carry up to 40 pounds by myself. Joe and I together would have 40 pounds. So we could drive with 40 pounds. We could take these. Do you like this? No, I don't like this. What do you want? Oh, I want this. Okay, I'll try and bring this to you by the end of the day. Whatever. So we go drive around, find out, make our contacts. And it was good because we were musicians, so we knew everybody by virtue of going to the shows. We go out to the shows, people were getting their, entertainment in. We say hello. They wanted to come talk to us. We're playing on the stage. It was wonderful. Before we knew it, we had a lot of contacts. And we loved what we did because we loved cannabis. And that's where we first got an introduction to the farms. We got to learn what the farms were doing. And Joe and I loved that because the agriculture part in many ways is the most beautiful part. You get to see the way they cultivate genetics and this and that. But that's how we started. And so from there, we were brokers. We got connected with all the farms, with all the different, and we started expanding throughout the state, right? Because there was always little growers inside of Santa Cruz, right? And they're like little farms. Now there's big ones, but back in those days they were small. So each farm might do like 100 pounds, the big end, the low end maybe 40. And so we go up to Sonoma County, right? Even bigger farms. Go up all the way to Humboldt. Now you're talking farms that are nailing out thousands of pounds. We called each 100 pound a box, right? And so if you got higher numbers, you make more money, the price of the cannabis comes down. Same thing's true for anything, right? So we always wanted to try and do that, and we did that for a while, and it worked out great. And typically you'd make a point. So for every pound you sold, you'd make around $100.
Okay.
Right? It was a really good margin. So if you sell 100 pounds in a day, you do the math. It was pretty good. And people were always happy to pay, and there was always enough cannabis there. But that window of time lasted a very short amount of time before things started to change due to legislation. It went from obviously being medicinal, product to be, and not a product. At that point, it was a medicine, so it wasn't handled as a product. There was no metric system to it. The taxes weren't there. It was largely a gray area. So we weren't paying taxes on the money we made. We'd pay some taxes, but not all the taxes we were supposed to pay. And it was made that way on purpose, so that and at that point in time, I believe the county laws were very flexible. the people that were, it was a good time in cannabis, in my opinion. It was a very good time. People were making money. The people who wanted it for their medicine was doing good. They were getting what they wanted, and they didn't have to pay for it. Almost 90% of the time, the people who really needed it did not have to pay for it. Nowadays, it's a lot different. You used to know who grew your cannabis. You used to know them personally, and you don't have that anymore.
Yeah,
very rarely.
It's big brands. It's big companies. For example, like when the legalization started in, I believe, 2017, in LA started a lot of different businesses. One of them is Ease. The other one that I like even probably more was Grassdoor, but they also got little down the hill. But it works like that you are shopping a weed like you would be shopping a pizza.
Yeah.
And they deliver it to you in like 45 minutes if you take something from the ASAP menu. If you take something with scheduled delivery for the next day, you have an option, let's say more than 1,000 products.
Wow.
And the ASAP menu is like 300, including you will have, let's say, 20 different kinds of flowers, 20 different kinds of pre-rolls, 20 different kinds of vapes, 20 different kinds of like different gummy bears and stuff like that. It's crazy.
It is.
And there is also other products in that. And this amount of the business literally spread it through the city. And now you see literally dispensaries popping everywhere. On every block there were some. And what I like to see was that I was thinking like, damn, this is gonna ruin the neighborhood, because I was like thinking maybe it's gonna bring a lot of like negative attention or something. BS, man. Like every time I was skating to the store next to those dispensaries, you will see very often older people
that's
like
right,
in the age of like 70 and up, going there together as a husband and wife, going in 5 minutes going out, and then guess what? They were just holding a paper bag, and inside of that were some things, for them. And they were like age of 70. Are you gonna come to them and be like, oh, you cannot do that? It's a drug. Dude, this guy knows what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
That also made me, okay, I'm not gonna order just online, but I wanted to see how the dispensaries look like. So I went in, and then because there is a waiting area, because you cannot go to that sales area like with 20 different people, only 2, maybe 3 at the most are allowed to go in after they check your ID and stuff. You are sitting there and you are talking to those guys. Sometimes not, sometimes you are. And very often they tell you what you just been describing the whole time. They go there for a medical reason. They don't go there because of they want to get high. They are in retirement. They don't care about getting high. They go there because it makes their life better. And I've been having so many of those conversations. It wasn't on deep level, but they've been literally telling me like, oh yeah, I go there because it helps me with pain. It helps me, or it helps me to just, sleep and stuff like that. But most people that I talk to had a problem with taste. Yeah. They eat more.
Yes.
If they smoke, they eat more. And once they eat more, well, the body functions better than if you starve. We already talked about it.
Yes.
So I seen a big difference in LA from 2017 until now, because it started with like one simple delivery service. We were like kind of like skeptical, how does it work? Then the shops start to pop. I don't think it ruined the city.
No way.
Honest.
No
I don't
way.
think so.
Yeah, and I think like you're hitting on that good point, and that's the point that people need to understand is like there were so many people in California, like mainly older people who had a lot to lose. They weren't going to just go buy a bag of weed on the corner and risk their whole lives. Even though they knew it was good and could potentially help them with their medicinal issues, they still weren't going to sacrifice or potentially put themselves in danger. They weren't going to do it.
Go to jail after
Yeah,
that.
they're not going to do it. They'll be like, you know what? I know it could help me, but I'm still not going to do it. So it's a big moment for them where they're like, I can finally go into a retail store. I have this issue, and I'm not going to be subjecting myself to like, jail time or something like that. And those people, man, there's so many of those people that ended up having the freedom finally to use it. And those people, because it's same thing with guns. You know, like if you have gun control going on, the law-abiding good people are not going to buy the guns, bro. The bad people will still buy the guns.
Yeah, and they will
So
not buy it in
yeah, and so
store.
all these people are like, oh my gosh, it's going to ruin the city.
Hmm.
No,
No.
it's not going to ruin the city because the people who are wanting to do it and that would ruin the city are already doing it.
Yes.
Okay, the good people that need it are finally going and doing it, and it's
Dude,
hilarious because
That
people
works
don't
with
get it.
everything.
It does. You know, it's like
But-
Chicago, right?
Yeah. The most strict gun laws,
Yeah.
and you see the amount of shootings every weekend is crazy. In LA, other things are ruining the city. Weed is not one of them.
Mhm.
It can be, like again, I don't support the, let's say, the dispensaries be right in front of the public schools or stuff like that, But I don't see any problem if there's just restaurants, whatever, and then you see a dispensary. You don't even see in.
Mhm.
They check your ID before going in. I tried because I do videos and stuff. I'm like generally very curious. I tried to take my European ID and tried to go there with it.
Not happening.
No way.
Yeah.
No way. Took my passport. No way.
Mhm.
It has to be California issued ID,
That's right.
or I would have to really find a guy who would just like make it through. What happened was that they never seen such a thing. They never seen, let's say, foreign passports or foreign driving license from Europe or whatever. So they didn't know what to do with it. So they rather don't sell it to me.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
know, maybe they could because it's government issued ID, but those guys up there were not sure what to do with that. So they rather said, "Hey, we're sorry.
Yes.
Find someone with ID."
Yep.
Which, again, this whole thing was for me more than a weed. I was really like trying to experience how the system works and whatever,
Yeah.
At
To
the
know
same
if it's being treated with respect.
Yeah.
You know, is this some kind of what is the deal here?
Mhm.
You know.
But exactly to your point, when you are talking about how it used to be just a matter of small farms and individuals who
Yeah.
really wanted it.
You had no selection
Yeah.
like you have now. Oh my gosh.
Well, yeah,
Now.
but now we have different kind of weed business.
Mhm.
Now it's really about money only,
Yes.
And to be honest, I would not really be able to have such a thing as a dispensary just because it's so crazy. There's so much focus on that, like the taxation of the thing. It's also nuts. You look at the product. Like I've been, let's say, buying the same thing year by year, but I seen like how they are changing the labels, how the marketing is getting involved, how this whole thing is just growing and blowing and blowing
It
and
is.
more. And from 2017, when literally this was like, oh yes, people like just started it. Some people were already expecting it, so they were kind of like first one on the track, and they start to do something like
Mhm.
this. Well, what it is right now, 5 years from that in 2017, that was maybe some people wet dream.
Yeah. Yeah. And Joe's gonna talk more about the Florida because each state has a different story.
Yeah.
And the way that the green rush has grown. And there's the pioneer states like California, Colorado, Washington, those West Coast states are definitely pioneers. But then there's all these other stories of it. And like you had said, it's really, it's interesting to see because when you have this enmeshment and this growth of like capitalism, and I love capitalism, man. It's got some great things to it, but like all the products, right?
Too much is too much.
Too much is too much. Like for me, I'm a simple man. I would take the stuff that I grew and I'd be happy with that, and I know what I want. And it's like for a lot of these kids, it's like flipping through the TV channels and they're like, wow, I got 1,000 different cannabises and you don't know what you're getting. It's
Exactly.
just like created. There's some bloat to the industry, I'd say. And like you said, it's a money making thing. So it's inevitable in some ways.
I can show you like some prices. You can literally get 2-pack joint, 1 gram, so it's half gram each for $8. That like pre-roll already good to go in a nice pack. I have a lot of friends who are collecting the packs, who are collecting the cases, who are collecting the tubes and
Really?
everything, because they are sometimes very interesting by design.
Yeah,
And
I
a lot
didn't
of,
know that.
Yeah, a lot of like the when you buy the 8 of of
In
a
the little
flower,
thing,
yeah, in
yeah.
the jar.
Yeah.
People are collecting those as well. you know?
It's cool though. It's like baseball cards,
Yes,
It's like
pretty much.
I smoked,
Yes.
and then sometimes a genetic won't stay around for long. It's like, and then you had it,
Yeah. I mean, you know, like you can literally buy a lot of different products. See, this is something that is crazy. Like you can get a joint, 41% THC. It's, you know, it's infused with the oil, and it's even there is on top the dust.
Yeah, the keef.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this thing. So I'll tell you a quick story. Every Friday, I was meeting with my 3 best friends. Sometimes we invite someone else, but we were just sitting in my patio.
Yeah.
We were doing barbecue. But every Friday, if let's say some of the guys had a date with a girl on Friday, he told her that the date is gonna be on Saturday, no matter how hot.
Important time. It's boy time, right?
Dude,
there.
but it was serious. For like almost 3 years until I moved out, we were doing this, and there were very few cases when someone had to bail out.
How many guys were there?
4 of us total.
Nice. That's right. That's good.
Sometimes, and no girls allowed.
That's right. You got to have it. Yeah.
And there were some chicks that we invite, like, whatever, but it was because we know them for so long that they wouldn't disturb the whole thing.
One of the guys, right?
She's one of the guys,
Yeah.
exactly. So one time we were smoking this thing, and you have to understand.
One
all
of those
those
high ones, like 41%?
yes, but
Oh, yeah.
but all those guys, they introduced me into that.
Okay.
So they were heavyweight compared to me.
Ah,
So then
I
we
know
were
where this story's
we were
going.
heavy well, so we were making a full round. We make one round. Then the next round, it was only 3 of us. The third one was just me and my buddy.
you
and
stuck it out.
And the fourth round, none of us wanted it. And my friend who smokes like crazy, he put it back to that case. I think it's this joint. I'm not 100% positive, but I think it's this joint. He put it back in and he said, all right, we'll wait a little bit. And I look at him, I'm like, bro, do you realize that this actually never, ever, ever happened? That 4 of us wouldn't finish a thing?
That's how powerful it was.
We were baked. And
Yeah,
then we were
totally.
like, just looking to the table, like all of us. And
Yeah.
we were like, that's too much.
Too much, yeah.
And guess why? It was straight the curiosity, because we wanted to see what it does.
Mm-hmm.
You seen 41%, damn, let's do it. It wasn't a good thing.
That's like kids, you know?
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
let's see what we can
So,
do. Right?
We haven't done that since. And
It's interesting too, like when your tolerance, people don't know this. And sometimes I was surprised at this too. Like your tolerance goes up like mad
Mhm.
if you smoke. Like if you see somebody who's an experienced smoker, and usually it's the smokers, because the smoking session is usually around 10 to 15 minutes if you have like a normal size joint. And it can become like, this person's smoking a lot of pot. What's the matter with them? Their tolerance is just really, really high. And the same thing can happen when you have edibles. If you're used to taking an edible, like, who's Joey Diaz? He's one of Joe Rogan's friends, right? This guy will pound 1,000 milligram edible, and that would annihilate a normal person. That would annihilate a whole 10 people, really.
Yeah.
But his tolerance is so high, so he's not having that same experience like what I would have. Like if I took one puff off that 41%er, I'd be orbiting the moon, man.
Yeah.
So it's interesting for people to know that, because they'll see somebody smoke like a giant joint and be like, man, he must be really high. How is he going to do anything today? But it's like, no, he's actually fine.
We had, let's say, a lot of different joints through the time, but this one specifically, since it was infused and a lot of stuff, it was something else, and we didn't have it since. We said like, too much is too much. It wasn't about that, you know. It wasn't about being baked. The same way how when you go and you have a beer with your buddies, it's not about being drunk and being on the floor and be embarrassing and be throwing up on the floor, you know. But I am very open-minded to the idea of legalization. Do what you wanna do, whatever, you know. I am also a big believer of keeping people out of this until they mature at some level, because I don't think if I would start smoking in, like, let's say 18, it would give me the same benefits what it does give me to now, you know, like right now. Especially like when you train jiu-jitsu, everybody in my old gym was high before training. They already smoke. I trained with Nate Diaz, and like when he starts, you know, training, they sometimes have a blunt before, sometimes don't. After training, always they go to sauna. They
didn't
talk.
know that.
It's like they
very
smoke
intimate.
all the time.
Yeah.
Like all those guys, they very often roll high. There is even a competition in California. It's called High Rollers.
Ah,
I think it's 14 years already.
wow.
The winner gets pound of wheat. and you smoke a joint with your opponent before the fight.
That's cool.
So you guys smoke, then you roll, and then once you win the whole tournament, you get a pound of weed, and it's big thing. It's big thing. People going. Nick Diaz goes there all the time, and people like that. It's huge, and it's not like some losers or stoners, bro. Like some freaking
That's
legit
right.
black belts goes there. Like
That's right.
guys who you would have to spend a lot of money so they would train with you, and they train there. You know, they're really good. One of my buddy went viral because he smoke a blunt with the guy, and they start grapple, and he kind of like push in his face.
Oh man.
And he like stand up, and he came and he wanted like just hit him like straight up. And the referee got in between them, and he gave him a blunt, and they
like,
both smoke.
Chill out, man.
One of my friend from Czech, he sent it to me, and he's like, "Look, that's crazy. That's in California." And I look it up. I'm like, "That's my buddy. I rolled with him yesterday." And that's the biggest stoner I have ever met. He always is like this.
Yeah,
But he's the biggest killer.
yeah.
He kills everyone. He just got his black belt, like very, very well deserved. Like
Good
he
for
is-
him.
Man, he is such a, but he is just like this
Yeah.
all the time. You never see him smile, and if he smiles, he's like,
Yeah.
but he's a really good guy.
But he's
and
one of the best.
yes, he's the
one of the
best.
best. Wow.
His cardio never ends. He goes 2 hours straight.
That's discipline, man.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
Really, really, really good.
Even Joe Rogan, you know, I'm
Same
so
thing.
happy there's these characters that are showing us that the stoner culture, like you may have a guy who looks like this, but he cuts
good.
like a razor, man.
Mhm.
This guy's disciplined. He's
Yes.
not what you think.
And he's focused.
Very focused. You
He's
know?
watching you with his stone eyes, little.
Yeah, he sees it.
And you are the only one that can fit into those little eyes. He doesn't see anything else, and he's going straight for you.
That's hilarious.
Is there something else you want to add to this story? Because we are going to also talk, I'm sure
Sure.
we are going to talk in future also with your brother, and maybe it
Yeah.
would be great if I would make the setup so I could talk to two of you guys. That would be also great.
Absolutely.
know?
That's a great question. So I'm thinking about your audience. The education about weed, I'd say if you have predisposed ideas concerning the substance, I'd encourage you to listen to these stories with an open mind. You know, to try and ask yourself the questions of like, where did I hear about this? Where did my ideas about cannabis come from? Who is telling me this stuff? And then to try and cross-examine that with truth and look at what's actually happening in a lot of these states. It's legal in California. There's a ton of people
It's
who are
legal in
using
like
it.
20 states. No?
Right, exactly.
Crazy.
That's where it began. Yeah. And so ask yourself those questions. Know what's going on here, and then try and take out the trash.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you got a lot of stuff involved where it's like old information, where it's falling under the propaganda thing, take out the trash and then open up your mind, because it's a very useful medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're dealing, like you brought up the appetite, like a lot of people use it for cancer recovery, right?
Yes,
Because it
yes.
it gets the
Big
appetite
time,
going,
big
right?
time.
Yeah, glaucoma, seizures, CBD, just for overall wellness as an anxiolytic. Just try and open up your mind, because there's chance that you can apply it and use it. But the most important thing is to not judge other people who do, because you don't want it to cause division. Because a lot of time governments, people and families, they will start to judge each other based on what they use, you know, and it's like it causes division, it causes pain, it causes strife. There's no reason for any of that. You know, if you're using heroin and you want to have an intervention for your brother, that's way different
Mhm.
than having a brother who's smoking, you know, some pot every now and then.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
you view it in a different way and educate yourself, and know that there's a lot to learn. You know, it's not just an easy little subject. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah. And be responsible. I mean, don't be like, oh, I hate it and I never tried it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But make your own opinion based on your own experience. It can be good, it can be bad, but I'm definitely very mad when I see that someone, let's say in my country, you know, was 19, 20 years old and had one joint, and they are telling him that he's gonna serve like 5 years in prison for that, you know.
dude, yeah.
Like things like that happens because the cops will tell you that he had 20,000 dosages from one joint.
My gosh.
We are always like, all my buddies from like who also live in California, but also they are from Czech or Slovakia. They're saying like, bro, I would like to see such a joint when I would have 20,000 dosages out
Yeah,
of one.
just-
I would love to have one of them because that would last me for some time, not like
Right.
those little things, you know. And
Yeah.
I mean, statistics are statistics, you know, as well, because when you look at it, think like how much crime is cannabis responsible for. how many accidents this cannabis is responsible for, and then you compare it to something like alcohol or some other substances that are, let's say, illegal, but they are not that nobody cares about it.
Right.
You know,
There's
like
no dogma. There's none of that demonization of the what you know. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
undergoing the scrutiny, the undue scrutiny that cannabis is.
put two guys into the room and give them a bottle of vodka and they will fight. Put two guys in the room, give them joint, they're gonna be best friends.
Yeah, they'll work through something together.
Yeah, they will do something.
Yeah,
they
they
will
will.
create some idea, you know.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
So, well, thank you very much.
My
was
pleasure.
Great. It was great, and I really wanted to bring someone who has knowledge about it and who is not just a stoner. Oh yeah, I play video games. My mom sucks. She thinks I should find a job. You know.
Yeah.
But I just like my fucking blunt. You know.
Yeah, right.
I didn't want that. You know. So I'm glad.
I'm happy I
you
could
guys
stand.
came.
Yeah, I'm happy we could stand it. And Joe has so much more to offer on
Yeah.
so many other fronts. And it's a great. We could talk about it for hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy I could stand in for cannabis and give a representation that's different from the status quo and stand aside from the stoner culture and let people know that there is a beautiful, burgeoning, growing culture in this, and people's lives can be changed in a positive way.
And it also creates the new jobs.
Exactly. Industry. Just look at how much Colorado made last year. For
All
sure.
right. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Pokud vás tento díl zaujal, tak tady jsou další díly. A tady jsou další klipy. Mějte se.